A ceasefire may be in place, but both sides still dispute the detail. The deal demanded a full Russian pullback from Georgian territory. So far, that hasn't completely happened. The international community is leaning heavily on Moscow to comply. After further talks, the Russian government has now agreed to withdraw the last of its troops by October. But there's a major sticking point. The very same issue that sparked this summer's conflict. The question of where Georgia's borders lie.
It's important to state that the Russian forces must be withdrawn to the lines that were drawn before hostilities began. Now all efforts must continue so talks and negotiations on these points can go on.
But Russia now recognises Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states. It made no mention of withdrawing from these disputed areas. And that isn't enough to satisfy the EU.
Nous avons condamné, je l'ai dit à Moscou il y a quelques heures.
We have condemned the unilateral recognition of the independent states of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are Georgian territories. No country is entitled to redraw alone and, on its own accord, the borders of a neighbouring state which is also a member of the United Nations.
Les frontières d'un voisin, membre de l'ONU.
Russia is making some concessions. It's promised to dismantle checkpoints near the Georgian port of Poti within a week. And it will allow 200 EU monitors into South Ossetia. But Moscow continues to blame the Georgian government for the ongoing tension.
I think that Russia is completely fulfilling the plan. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same for the Georgian side. It's trying to restore its military potential and is actively supported by some of our partners, and first of all by the United States of America.
But the Georgian people are losing patience with the Russian presence. Further talks between the two sides will be held in Geneva in October. Kitty Logan, Sky News.
The problems are multiplying across the globe. You saw them this summer with the Russians in Georgia, and you're now pretty much at loggerheads, it seems, with Moscow. Turning to the other theatre you're fighting in, Iraq, how are you going to get an extension of your mandate to be there through the United Nations when the Russians might well try and block you there?
Well, first of all, I would say that I would frame the Russian issue differently. I would say the Russians are at loggerheads with everybody else. I think one of the positive aspects of the post-Georgia problem is that the Europeans and the Americans are on the same page, and we are very supportive of President Sarkozy's initiative to try and get the Russians back inside the security zones that existed before August 8th.
If this summer, you want Georgia inside NATO and Ukraine, if this summer that had been the situation, you might have had to go to war over the Georgia situation. Would you have been prepared to do that?
Well, I'm not going to deal with hypotheticals,
well, but I have really been,
but I have been a very strong proponent of the view that NATO is a military alliance. Mm-hmm. It's not a talk shop, and Article 5 means what it says. So there is a commitment to go to the assistance of our allies if they are challenged.
That was pretty clear, but let me get it even more clearly. Therefore, if and when excuse me, Georgia does come into the NATO alliance, you stand by Article 5. An attack on any member is an attack on all.
We would stand by our commitments.
What do you think of Russia? Do you think we are in a type of new Cold War? And how do you deal with this new, as I assume you see it, belligerence coming from Moscow?
Well, there certainly is a new belligerence. I don't think there's a new Cold War. This Russia is not the Soviet Union. This Russia does not have universalist aspirations or ideology. If anything, it's trying to recapture perhaps some of the past glory of the Russian Empire and this sort of archaic assertion of a sphere of influence and special place in the near abroad, the countries on its periphery. I think Georgia is going to prove to be a Pyrrhic victory for Russia. I think that over the long term, in terms of the way the rest of the world looks at them, that they will pay a considerable price. And the question is, does Russia want to be part of the 21st century or part of the 19th century? Because it can't be both.
Well, it wants to be part of the 21st century by having its influence in its sphere of influence? Do you accept it has a sphere of influence?
No, absolutely not.
Do you have a sphere of influence in Latin America?
No, I don't think so. And I think
Cuba?
the behavior of Castro and of Hugo Chavez and some of the others is pretty evident that we don't have a sphere of influence. If the Russians want to fly blackjack bombers into Venezuela, so be it.
And if you want to put your navy into the port of Poti, so be it.
So be it.
So you don't recognize a sphere of influence for Russia in that part of the world, Ukraine?
I think that's an archaic concept. Many of the countries on Russia's periphery, particularly in Eastern Europe, are democracies. They have the freedom to choose their own future.
You don't think there's a danger of actually going to war if you take that attitude to its logical conclusion, if the Russians push as well?
I think that the risk of a military confrontation with Russia is very, very low. I think there is a good bit of a probability of the Russians trying to use pressure, both political and economic, as well as intimidation, to try and make their influence felt. I think the solidarity of the West in reacting to that, A, can be peaceful and B, effective.
Who do you think's running the show, Medvedev or Mr. Putin?
Well, it's hard to tell, but I would say that Medvedev is probably, if he wasn't at the beginning of the Georgian crisis on the same page as Putin, he seems to be now.